Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the third event in our 45th anniversary webinar series. My name is Lauren Murphy, and I'm the Global Director of ICRW Advisors, the private sector consulting arm of the International Center for Research on Women. And I'm joining you today from Washington, DC, and our ICRW team is also joining from New Delhi, Nairobi, and Kampala. So welcome, everyone. We are delighted to have you, and it's an honor to be with you. Today's webinar will focus on the role that the private sector can play in helping to advance gender equity. And it is such an exciting time in this space. Companies are asking how they can leverage their core business strengths to drive social impact. And they're asking questions about how they can bring their leverage and their influence to drive gender equity, and importantly, in partnership. They're asking questions around gender as an opportunity for value creation, and also weighing that with the risks of inaction. And there are a broad range of benchmarks and indices that are measuring corporate progress on gender equity within their corporate four walls, along their supply chains, and also in their community. And these assessments are increasingly showing that gender equity is becoming a material issue for social sustainability, and it is of investor interest. And we see more and more private sector actors are making bold commitments around gender equity, and they're crafting meaningful strategies where gender is intersecting with other pressing social equity and environmental concerns. For example, we're seeing goals around supply chain commitments in factory, farm, and women-owned businesses. We're seeing performance compensation being linked to gender efforts. And we're seeing increasingly more gender being linked into human rights due diligence efforts and work around upskilling and climate change strategies. Yet, we know this work also has challenges. The pandemic has brought setbacks and opportunities for women's labor force participation and earning potential. So today we have an opportunity to discuss, to learn, and to share with you what we are doing at ICRW Advisors in partnership with our clients. So we'll spend the beginning portion of our hour together to walk through a variety of private sector company examples that are leading in this space. So you'll be hearing about particularly what these clients are solving for and what their unique ability is to address these issues. We will then pivot to a panel with two of our long-term and leading clients, Unilever and Nike. And we give deep thanks to two of our guests, Anouk Hyland, Global Sustainability Director, Social Equity and Inclusion from Unilever, and Lindsay Young, Global Director, Responsible Sourcing and Manufacturing from Nike. And thank you both so much for joining us today. They will be explaining their journeys working on gender equity along supply chains in local community and in their broader sustainability work. So it's an action-packed 60 minutes. And as we turn to our next slide, I'd like to introduce you to our team. This is our ICRW Advisors team. You will see in the center, Ali Glinsky, Associate Director and long-term ICRW veteran, Shelley Martin, Senior Project Manager, Rachel Oguntola, analyst, and Veronica Alvarez, our newest member, who also joins us as an analyst. And you'll hear from many of them today in our discussion. And on our next slide, I'd like to overview, in short, who we are. We are a global gender consultancy that guides clients with evidence-based, actionable insights that drive business value. So we are a consulting team housed within the larger nonprofit of the International Center for Research on Women. And our clients are varied. They include companies, investors, development agencies, foundations, and leading non-governmental organizations. And we offer these clients 5 main things: diagnostics, strategy design, capacity building, measurement, and evaluation. So you can think of this as meaningful, where are clients starting? What is the baseline? What is that initial diagnostic? We help them envision then what's possible. What is the strategy to get there? Then help them get there through capacity building, measure if they got there, and then evaluate the extent to which they reach their goals. So those are our core products and services. And our next slide shows you a little bit about our background. ICRW Advisors formally launched in 2016. So we've been consulting for the last 5 years in 5 primary areas, which you'll see here. They are supply chain, environmental, social governance and sustainability, impact investing, consumer and community engagement, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So when we engage with our clients, these are our core 5 areas. And listed here are a few of our highlights. In supply chain, we've done quite a bit on strategy and tool design that today have reached more than 160 different suppliers globally. We're working with clients, which you'll hear about in a bit, with Unilever on global frameworks for gender equity and their sustainability goals. We've partnered with a variety of impact investors to help them be more gender smart across a variety of sectors, ranging from agribusiness to apparel. In consumer and community engagement, we've helped companies dive deep in local community with meaningful research that have connected their products with girls and women in local community. And this work has often been broadened to larger corporate multi-pronged gender strategies. And then finally, in our DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging work, we've done trainings and offered resources to help corporate employees in global markets be more DEIB aware. And finally, I want to walk you through a little bit of our client journey. So this slide shows you our origins, starting in around 2014 and 15 with initial foundational work with GAP, Acumen, and the Oak Foundation. And the question there at the time was, can the private sector and can ICRW Advisors work with the private sector to leverage its scale and impact to drive gender equity? And we decided yes. So in 2016, we formally launched Advisors with IIED as our first client. And this was the beginning. It came from a spark of an idea in those years to say, yes, the private sector can be an influential lever to help ICRW reach its overall mission. It's one of our core abilities to help achieve the overall goal of our organization while helping private sector companies in their journey. And to summarize the growth of our client engagements, I'd call out three main things. One, we see more and more companies moving into shared value. So this means, how do they leverage their core business to drive social goals through both core sourcing, risk mitigation, and also strategic philanthropy? So combining both of those levers to make change in gender equity. Second is broadening their gender ambition. So at the beginning of our work, clients came to us with discrete asks in particular parts of the company, and they are now broadening their ambition to larger, more holistic gender strategies that might combine different parts of the business, whether it's consumer marketing, supply chain, environmental and social governance. And then third, they're reaching beyond their corporate structure, their supply chain work, and their community to work in industry partnership. So they're asking very deep questions about how they can work with other partners at the industry level to drive change. So this is an overview of where we've come, and I am so excited now for you to hear from our team about some different examples that you're seeing here around concretely how these companies and organizations have driven gender equity. So I will pass it over to Shelley Martin, who will begin that discussion.
Thanks so much, Lauren. It's an honor to be with you all here today, and I'm going to kick us off by sharing about 3 of our work streams where I focus most at the moment. You can pop onto the next slide. The first is our work to strengthen and future-proof agricultural supply chains. That's where a lot of our work is around diagnosing constraints and ensuring that we design activities that safeguard and enhance supply chains with a gender lens. Building corporate capacity to expand women's roles, that could be as cultivators, farm managers, aggregators, even in processing plants, and then leveraging impact data to drive adoption of social and environmental sustainability priorities. That could be in the local procurement teams, from smarter compliance and supplier accountability metrics to rigorous social and commercial impact evaluation, really leveraging that data. Next is our seminal work that Lauren mentioned around working with leading impact investors. We help investors who are impact first, finance first, could be development finance institutions or bilateral agencies or even foundations to craft investment strategies and processes that better value and advance gender equity within their portfolios. This is work that we're really excited about. And then third today, I'll touch on as well our purpose-driven brand portfolio. This work is around refining brands' purpose and designing evidence-backed strategies for them to really promote value in the communities where they work. It's unlocking greater brand affinity and broader consumer market capture while they're creating measurable impacts on gender equality. On the next slide, I'm going to share about an exciting partnership right now that we have with PepsiCo, USAID, and Resonance Global, the implementer. The partnership engaged ICRW Advisors to guide your Global Development Alliance. And we're generating evidence on the business case for investing in women in different procurement models within PepsiCo as a food and beverage giant within their global potato and plantain supply chains. So part of this is about the sort of initial phase that we're just wrapping up in this first year, which is researching the supply chain and designing activities. We've been conducting formative research and facilitating learning among global partners. And right now, co-creating market-based theories of change with procurement teams and partners from USAID local missions, as well as residents in ICRW. We're working in Colombia, India, Pakistan, and Vietnam. Over the next 3 years, we'll be advising on implementation of different activities to shift norms and enable women to advance in these key supply chains, and building the capacity of the local teams to take some of this work forward. Finally, we'll be evaluating activities and their impacts. So by 2025, we'll be publishing robust evaluations on the social impacts of the Alliance activities on women farmers and other supply chain actors, and the commercial impacts on PepsiCo's core business in these 4 countries. Well, and a really exciting part about this alliance is that it also aims to influence the industry and to embed some of these tools and processes for thinking with a gender lens into PepsiCo's core business. So we're going to be creating business-friendly gender equity resources that we can embed into other markets and maybe even other commodities beyond potato and plantain, where we're piloting. Right now, that's included a detailed supply chain empowerment framework we're calling the CHEF, and that's guiding, PepsiCo's corporate livelihood goals. At the moment, they've launched a really exciting agenda called Purposedriven, and the livelihood goals are really chief among them. So this will be a perfect synergy in terms of the focus of where the company is moving forward in this work. Next, I want to give an example of some of our investor work. This is one from last year, where we were engaged by the Belgian investment company for developing countries, Bio. So Bio came to ICRW and said we are ready to facilitate workshops that go deeper on addressing gender-based risks, specifically looking at issues of gender violence and harassment in infrastructure projects. So we were able to research and design a half-day training package for their portfolio companies and senior management of these projects and companies, so that we would explore gender-based violence and harassment as a concept, looking at frameworks for what it is, and developing skills for gender-responsive risk assessment, including how do we have more inclusive stakeholder engagement throughout the process, throughout the different steps and stages in the cycle of project management. We also developed tips for harmonizing gender analysis in other performance management procedures. And it was really great to facilitate this kind of regionally. So in 4 different workshops, focusing on Africa and Asia, with really contextual examples, drawing on the expertise of the participants. So in this way, we got to discuss together as groups, what are the internal policies, staff training, grievance mechanisms, referral pathways locally, ways to incorporate worker voice into monitoring, and other great ideas that we sourced and built upon as a group. As we touched on earlier, some of our other investor work has started at this point, and then we also do want to enhance gender ambition and thinking across a more holistic lens within client companies. We've done this in some of our other work, for example, with CDC Group, MCC, and the Private Infrastructure Development Group, PIDGE, to systematize, operationalize, and propose measurement frameworks that capture some of those social and material benefits for the investee companies. We also specialize in doing case studies and ex-ante studies that showcase a range of gender smart elements in real companies' business models, and how TA, technical assistance activities, can push some of these companies to the next level, including thinking through some of that market-based theories of change. Lastly, I'll highlight our purpose-driven brand work, and as an example, share specifically about the position that Unilever, our partners at Unilever, are spearheading on purpose work. It's exciting because every brand within the Unilever family is taking this forward. For them, purpose represents sort of that social mission that extends beyond a corporate social responsibility lens to really create meaningful impact in the communities where the brand has the strongest footprint. They're leveraging and enhancing brand power as a positive influence in the key markets. So the purpose starts with what the brand says and communicates on pack or on screen, and then goes further to activations where local markets deliver programs or partner with organizations to deliver programs for deeper social impact. Together with brand leads, ICRW Advisors is creating evidence-based theories of change, strategic plans, key performance indicators for global brands' community-facing activities, tackling some of those really tough gender issues. So we develop research together on key topics that are important to the brands. This is extended from discrimination in the workplace to girls' education and others. We also test and refine social change methodologies for priority markets and create data measurement systems that allow brands to understand and communicate their true reach and impact. I'll give a few quick illustrative examples of some of our favorite engagements with consumer goods brands in the last couple of years. We have Lux, where we've been working together to combat everyday sexism in Pakistan, China, South Africa, and other markets. Tresemme, where we've been building executive presence in women in the UK and working on a presence masterclass to equip women with resources and coaching to step up that presence and ambition in the workplace. And then Sunsilk, as you can see here, Alan Jope, the CEO of Unilever, is celebrating a white paper that we wrote together on advancing girls' aspirations. And so we've been working together with them and are now in kind of the later stages of our partnership to evaluate some of the hard work that the brand and its partner, Girl Rising, have been leading in diverse consumer markets around the world. So that's what I wanted to share about on these three streams. Next up, I'll pass to my colleague Rachel to share about two other related streams of work that are powerfully driving equity in the private sector. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Shelley. I will now speak to two other areas of work we at ICRW Advisors focus on. As we all know, the COVID pandemic has heightened our awareness of systemic and structural injustices and inequalities, as many of these issues have been brought to the forefront. Working women are facing more pressure as they take on more household responsibilities due to remote work. People are leaving their jobs at an alarming rate in what has now been termed the Great Resignation. These issues are complex, and organizations are looking for innovative and impactful ways to address these concerns, as well as to create an inclusive workplace environment where everyone feels like they belong. As such, we offer DEI consulting services to help guide our clients through this process in moving towards a more equitable society that works for all. Another area we focus on is in ESG and sustainability. Organizations are also directing more resources into their ESG and sustainability efforts and are making large-scale investments to raise their ESG profile. These organizations want to get it right, and we help our clients do just that and with an intersectional lens. I will now share one project example per each of the focus areas I spoke about. On the next slide, as part of our DEI workstream, we've worked with an agriculture-focused global social impact organization that's looking to understand where they could make improvements in their DEI efforts. In partnership with this organization and with external DEI experts, we engage leaders from the organization in a series of equity-centered workshops to promote gender equitable skills and anti-racism practices for the workplace. We also engage the broader workforce through a global employee survey and led focus group and interview discussions on key areas to catalyze diversity, equity, and inclusion at work. This diagnostic work led us to develop a detailed report of key findings during the assessment, where we also outlined critical evidence-based recommendations for the organization to take on in this work. On the next slide, for our ESG and sustainability focus area, we are working in close collaboration with Unilever to develop a gender equity framework that will enable the company to track, improve upon, and support more effective gender integrated work across its business initiatives. To develop this framework, we consulted with key external stakeholders in the gender equity space to identify and validate the core drivers of gender equity. We also leverage ICRW's wealth of research and expertise in this work to create a self-assessment survey tool consisting of key questions that assess the level of gender consideration and integration under each core driver of gender equity across the initiative. We have now piloted this tool with some of Unilever's social sustainability initiatives, with plans to scale the tool across all initiatives that fall under Unilever's company-wide corporate strategy, also known as the Unilever Compass. the ultimate goal of which is to further embed gender equity into every part of the company's business. So these are just some examples of projects we work on as part of our client advisory services. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Ali, who will walk us through our work in supply chains as well as guide and moderate our panel conversation further on. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Rachel. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our work in supply chain, as Rachel mentioned. Through this work, we help brands and suppliers to identify and integrate policies and practices that promote gender equity and empower women workers from the factory floor to the farm. These strategies help to enhance business outcomes such as employee retention and productivity, and also social outcomes such as worker well-being and women's empowerment. To do this, we conduct diagnostics, design gender strategies, develop tools and programs, and assist brands and suppliers in creating measurement systems to enhance gender equity. Next slide. A project that I want to talk about that has really turned into a whole stream of work for us is related to the gender equity self-diagnostic tool. I'll give you an overview now, and Lindsay from Nike will also hit on this later. So in partnership with Nike, we developed an open source gender equity self-diagnostic tool for textile clothing and footwear manufacturing suppliers. These are essentially factories located all over the world that produce goods for Nike and others. It's an online questionnaire to be filled out by suppliers to assess the current state of gender integration in their facilities. The suppliers fill out an online survey, and then it automatically generates a personalized scorecard, which diagnoses strengths and areas for improvement for integrating gender across policies, practices, and operations. And by using this kind of self-diagnostic approach, the tool is really putting the power in the hands of the supplier to determine what are the areas that they need to work on to enhance gender equity. And then they're able to communicate this up to the brand and work together on those specific initiatives. Versus sometimes in the past, what we had seen is brands may have been coming to suppliers with their flagship initiative or training program, which may or may not have been aligned with suppliers' needs. So this diagnostic is really kind of putting the suppliers in the driver's seat to determine what do we need to do to enhance gender equity, communicate to the brands, and then implement such initiatives. We first developed the tool with Nike, and they're rolling it out with their 100+ strategic suppliers each year. They've already done it 2 years. They plan to use this on an ongoing basis to motivate and track continuous improvement over time. And Nike also then brought us into a working group, and we brought on 6 additional brands who are interested in piloting this tool. And we've now piloted with 60 additional suppliers throughout Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, and Vietnam. And with piloting with these brands, what we tried to do is really identify shared suppliers to reduce some of the duplication. So as you may know, many brands source from the same suppliers, and each individual brand might have their own women's empowerment strategy, programs, and this can create a lot of duplication. What we even see sometimes is that an individual woman worker in a factory will be participating in similar and yet slightly different women's empowerment trainings and initiatives brought by different brands. So one of the kind of main objectives of this tool is to reduce some of that duplication, get multiple brands on the same page with an approach to helping suppliers determine what they need to do to enhance gender equity. We're now kind of rolling the tool out more broadly, engaging one-on-one with certain brands to roll it out with their suppliers. And we're also engaging with Nike and some of the other brands who participated in the pilot to build supplementary tools, such as a worker voice tool that would provide suppliers with data collection methods and survey questions for collecting worker perspectives on the topics that are covered in the self-diagnostic tool. Our ultimate vision for the tool is that it becomes an industry standard for diagnosing opportunities for enhancing gender equity within the apparel sector. We hope that we not only help suppliers to diagnose strengths and weaknesses, but also provide them with the resources to implement new policies, practices, and initiatives to address these identified gaps, ultimately enhancing gender equity and improving women's leadership within factories. Another project that I wanted to touch on, back one. Thank you. Another project I wanted to touch on is some work we've done with Nike and the Levi Strauss Foundation around conducting assessments with individual suppliers to explore root causes of gender inequity and sexual harassment within factory settings. We, in order to assess these root causes, we did assessments with 7 Nike suppliers and 3 suppliers of Levi Strauss. We reviewed policies, HR data, conducted interviews with management, surveys with employees, and focus group discussions with employees. And then using the insights generated, we provide tailored recommendations to each supplier for preventing and mitigating the effects of sexual harassment through enhancing gender equity. And an important point here that we stress with these suppliers is they're not the ones who've created the harmful behavior that exists within the factory setting, the sexual harassment or other gender inequitable structures. These are things that come from gender inequitable structures and discrimination that exist in society. However, they can have a really powerful role to play in changing these structures. And when they do, it can help them with employee retention and productivity, and also improve the lives of their workers. We also provided recommendations from these assessments to the brands themselves around kind of broader level themes that were emerging. And for example, Levi Strauss has been able to integrate some of those recommendations into their key supplier terms of engagement and strategy documents. I now have the pleasure of kicking off our panel discussion with 2 of our amazing clients, Anouk Hylen and Lindsay Young. Anouk is the Global Sustainability Director of Social Equity and Inclusion at Unilever. Her career has been driven by her strong belief in the need for a unified global sustainability growth agenda to drive transformational change. And Lindsay Young is the Responsible Sourcing Manufacturing Director at Nike. Her background has centered around the intersections between business and social and environmental impact. So first, a question to both of you. I'll let Lindsay from Nike go first, but just give us kind of a bit of an overview. How did you begin your gender journey? What are some of the first actions you took? And what are some of the insights you have learned from this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, thank you so much for inviting us to this session today. It's super exciting to see the journey of ICRW Advisors and to celebrate this anniversary with you all. So to answer your question, over 70% of the people that make Nike products are women. And yet female representation decreases as you move up the leadership ranks. This is no surprise and often seen, in many different industries. But for us, we think it's really important to think about how we can have a central focus on advancing gender equity within our manufacturing supply chain. And so as we look towards setting our 2025 targets, we really wanted to understand what was the best way to approach this. And so we did a couple of things. One, we looked at existing data that we had. So we have an engagement and well-being survey that workers within our manufacturing supply chain participate in, and that gives us great insights into their experiences. And what we found through that survey is that we saw men actually being promoted into initial leadership positions much more often than women were. The next thing that we did was we actually talked to our suppliers and asked about their biggest workforce challenges over the next decade. And at the top of many of their minds was the ability to attract, retain, and develop talent in the midst of increasing competition for labor. And so for us, with such a heavy concentration of women in their workforce, we recognized how important this sort of central concept of advancing gender equity would be, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it would help solve that problem for them. And so finally, we looked for inspiration, and we sort of found that in 2 places. One is we have some of our factory suppliers that we work with that have set their own targets in this space. And so, for example, one of our longstanding suppliers out of Sri Lanka, Moss, has their own targets around advancing gender equity and really strong cultures around this work. And the second thing we did was we worked with ICRW. And so we were really interested, as Ali mentioned earlier, in sort of understanding a much more holistic view and putting our suppliers in the driver's seat. We feel like actually having them take on the work of what does advancing gender equity look like within our organization, and having us play the role of really highlighting this important value for us, developing the business case, and supporting advocating tools, resources, and accountability would really help drive that. And so ICRW was really critical in doing a couple of things for us. One is really helping us sort of create, understand, and implement a really holistic strategy that takes a comprehensive view of gender equity. And then secondly, they also helped us really quickly go into very sort of specific deep dive areas, such as concerns around sexual harassment, which Ali previously touched on, to really help us think about how those types of issues are in part need to be addressed through a comprehensive view of advancing equity, in addition to responding to sort of specific concerns as well.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, that's a great overview. And what about you, Anouk? Can you talk a little bit about Unilever's gender journey and kind of some of the first actions, how things have evolved, and some insights you've learned along the way?
Yes, of course. And let me just echo Lindsay. Thank you so much for having me here today, and big congratulations on this milestone. I guess after the intros by Shelley and Rachel on all our brand work and the gender equity framework, they already gave some good insights into what we do as a company. But to go back a bit, so we started in 2010 with the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which was kind of our first iteration of our kind of sustainability strategy, which had smart targets with the 2020 deadline. It was quite heavy on environment, and it was only later in 2014 that we added the enhancing livelihoods pillar, with a specific focus on women as well. So we had a target to help women get access to opportunities, help drive their safety, get access to skills, and enhance fairness in the workplace. So over the course of that 6-year period or so, we've enabled 2.34 million with access to initiatives around kind of safety, skills, and opportunities. And in our own workforce in 2019, we achieved gender parity in manager roles, which was a huge step up from the 38% of when we started. I guess overall, if you look at our social strategy, obviously human rights are key and core to what we do. In 2015, we issued our first human rights report, and we report on 8 salient human rights issues, and we take a gender lens on that as well. To share a little bit on the insights of the work that we do on women. So first of all, it's very important to work with the right partner. So obviously ICRW is a well-known partner that we work with, and I think especially because she brings such kind of rigor and a science and methodology to the work that we do, it really kind of helps progress the issue and the impact that we want to have as a business. But also, for example, UN Women is one of our partners, and we work with them on safety and stereotypes, and kind of to give you an overview, kind of UN Women really has kind of also a global understanding of the issue, but they have a local footprint, which makes learnings from the partnership transferable to other settings as well. Another kind of an insight is that we don't need to kind of approach gender in isolation, right? But as a cross-cutting issues, and really kind of look at the entire ecosystem and our entire footprint, which is basically what I think, as Rachel mentioned, is something that we want to do through the gender equity framework. But to give you kind of an idea on how that works in terms of the entire ecosystem, we look, we call it internally the onion, but we start like with our own workforce, right? So looking at the people, so the 160,000 or so working for Unilever, and then look at gender parity, but also flexible working, on stereotype in the workplace. And there's various initiatives aimed to kind of help women progress in their careers and find a sense of belonging in the workplace as well. The next layer is a little bit about the value chain, which is both upstream and downstream. So with retailers selling Unilever products, which are often kind of female as well, and farmers that produce the Unilever, products that we make in our products. And we have commitments to drive up wages for all women in our supply chain, spend up to 2 billion annually with diverse suppliers and including women as well. So that's kind of a little bit of the work in the value chain. And then that next layer is really, as Shelley mentioned, bring that to life through the power of our brands, right? And I think the biggest added value there is about the behaviors and gender norms that we can influence through media reach as well. And then that outer layer, really kind of looking at society at large and really looking at the systems change that we want to drive, working together with partners. I think Lauren mentioned that in the beginning, right? As one of the three trends that you see, that they want to look beyond the corporate structure as well. So for example, Unilever partners in the On-Stereotype Alliance to change the way that the advertisement industry thinks about their kind of ads and how they kind of influence thinking on the role of women in society, but also Generation Equality Forum, which was just last year as well. So let me just pause here with a few insights.
No, thanks so much, Knut. That was great. And of course, it's fascinating to think about the influence that brands such as Unilever and Nike can have at those kind of multiple levels of influence, how you engage with your workers, communities, wider society. So it's great to kind of hear that structure laid out. So now for Lindsay, obviously I gave a bit of an overview of the gender equity self-diagnostic tool that we've developed and ICRW's perspective on kind of the objectives and what we're hoping to achieve. But I'd love to hear from you, why were you interested in creating this tool and what are you hoping to achieve with it?
Yeah, so we wanted to have our suppliers have the ability to look at gender equity holistically within their organization and understand both areas of strength and areas of opportunity before really moving forward and sort of investing in like a specific program or a specific training. In addition, I mean, we already mentioned this, but I think it's so important to say that we really wanted to have the suppliers in the driver's seat. We really think that sustainable change happens when the organizations themselves can take on this work, embed it within their own organizations, and really own and drive that change. And so this way of sort of developing this tool was really helpful for us because it did a couple of things. One, when suppliers filled it out, it created awareness of even the definition and concept of a much more holistic understanding of gender equity. The other thing that it did was it really helped highlight how gender equity is sort of embedded across an organization as compared to just sort of focusing on a specific standalone program. And so we had worked with ICRW on developing our gender strategy, and we're really interested in thinking about really how we could sort of make the sustainable change happen. And so actually having ICRW be the one to house this tool, I think also lended sort of extra credibility to really thinking about, gender equity based off of their experience across different industries and different geographies. And it also helps our suppliers sort of finally think about, very tangible next steps that they can take to really move themselves forward on this journey.
Thanks. Yeah. And Lindsay, one thing that I think has been unique and also really rewarding and hopefully largely impactful is that Nike hasn't done this alone, but you, as I mentioned, you have brought in all of these other brands to kind of also use this tool and try to really create an industry standard around it. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, kind of how and why you've done that, and what you see that contributing to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think foundationally across, our organization, we believe that collaboration is really key to raising the bar on industry standards. As you previously mentioned, many of the suppliers that we work with source from multiple brands. And so when we think about, key challenges that we face, advancing gender equity needs to be an industry solution and not just specific to the work that we're doing. And so when we actually first were looking for this sort of type of diagnostic tool, we actually started by just sort of seeing what else was out there in hopes that we could just leverage another tool. And when we didn't see that, it sort of caused us to pause a bit and say, gosh, if this isn't out there for us, it's also not out there for others. And so we really wanted to have the opportunity to sort of think about, okay, how do we actually work in collaboration with others and really think through how we actually help factories really start with this tool. And so this was really helpful because I think it did a couple of things. One is that it, it started with the question of where are your strengths and where are your opportunities for improvement, instead of starting with the brand saying do this program, or for us to say do this initiative. The second is that it did. I mean, as you mentioned, the intention is that we really reduce duplication and not having these suppliers be sent in a different direction. We really want them to be focused on advancing gender equity and not just sort of taking, many different assessments, but really sort of sending them in the same direction. I think one of the things that was really positive coming out of that pilot for me was both from the brand's perspective, their field teams, as well as the suppliers directly, was to see what a positive experience it was to really collaborate on this tool and pilot and sort of see common levels of excitement and potential value that sort of we collectively saw coming out of that process. And so we're at an exciting stage to really take that now to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Anouk, one of the things that we know makes Unilever unique is the mandate for all brands to have a mission-driven purpose, what Shelley was talking about previously in her overview. And obviously, we've worked with several different Unilever brands over the years, kind of develop strategies, refine measurement frameworks. But I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about some of the impacts that you think the purpose-driven brand work has had and how this helps create shared value for Unilever.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I saw a question about unstereotyping the workplace as well in the chat. I thought I kind of answered that as well. I quickly reached out to one of my colleagues to get the stat actually, because we did a research, and apparently in our own workforce, 60% of women felt that stereotypes were holding them back in their work. So we created the right kind of policies and took action on that. So for example, around maternity leave, but also for men, paternity leave, that we have policies around that. We have something that we call a gender appointment ratio, which means so that we look at are women are taking into consideration in leadership roles, and is there kind of a good ratio on that as well. And looking back to the appointments of kind of senior leaders and who they actually hired in their teams over the last 5 years or so. We're doing that with Harvard. And so, for example, in supply chain, we challenge that women don't want to work in and cannot work in factories. So we did a lot of work on that as well. And to come back to your question on the impactful brands, I kind of touched upon that before, right? So brands have a lot of influence on perceptions and behavior through their advertising overall. And gender stereotypes specifically could kind of reinforce those social norms, right? So that's why we work on progressive advertisement, and we've done research that it's more impactful with consumers, it drives purchase intent, and it improves credibility of the brand itself. So let me just give you one example, because I think Shelley already mentioned Lux and Tresemme and Sunsilk in the introduction. Dove is another big brand that we have, and it has a mission to empower the next generation through body confidence education. They've reached an impressive 69 million young people through their kind of Dove self-esteem program since 2004. They have, to amplify delivery of their mission and their brand purpose, they've had a range of partners to work with, including UNICEF, the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, and Girl Effect. And they basically have a module whereby they go in class and work together with young girls directly to kind of think about how they, about their body appearance. And all these partnerships have further led to kind of improve the program design and the funding models to really kind of scale those projects as well. Another example of what Dove is doing in terms of their advertisement, what I was just referring at, is a project that we call Show Us. It's with their creative agency, Girl Gaze and Getty Images. Basically, it's a collection of 10,000 plus images, and it's a crowdsourced platform. So it's up to everybody who has a good image to kind of upload it. So it's powered by women in front and behind the camera, and it's without any digital distortion or shattering stereotypes, and it's for an open source to use. So yeah, that's a little bit about Dove. And then I think, Ali, I mean, ICRW has worked so often indeed with Unilever and with our brands. Is there anything particular that kind of resonates with you well, and that you feel is kind of really impactful in terms of touching women's lives?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You know, our journey with some of the brand work it's a learning experience, a learning journey, because at first it felt a little bit kind of marketing-ish and felt a little out of our comfort zone, but we had to really engage with the brands to understand, like, what is the objective of this work? What is their ultimate goal? And I think what we've done with the brands that we've engaged with, that Shelley was talking about, is helping them think through not just like what's a cool one-off women's empowerment program that can, you know, create a headline, but how do we create a strategy that like maps the ultimate change we're trying to achieve? What are we going to do? Who are we going to partner with? And when the brands start thinking about kind of their women's empowerment programming through this more comprehensive approach, they have such a platform for influence, because they can do, you know, social norm change through marketing messages. They have such wide reach. And then they also have the, you know, financial ability to develop really strong programs at the community level. And so I think seeing those brands that connect different levels of their influence has been really interesting, and helped us to see the power that these brands can have. Lindsay, I'm going to turn back to you, actually. I alluded when I was talking about the gender equity, the self-diagnostic tool, a little bit about the next phase of work related to worker voice. And so I know that Nike is interested in kind of supplementing the work you've been doing to collect worker perspectives on some of these same topics. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about, you know, what you hope to achieve and why you think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So it should go without saying that, you know, putting workers at the center is so core to everything that we do. And with gender equity, this should be no exception, right? So I had mentioned previously our engagement and well-being work that we've been scaling since 2017, which really focuses on understanding workers' experiences on the production floor and really supporting factories and developing the capabilities needed to really incorporate the feedback from those experiences to really improve how workers are feeling valued and engaged and well at work. And so that experience has been really foundational for us as we've started to transition into the gender equity work to really think about, you know, how does gender equity look from the experience of the worker? And so this diagnostic tool that ICRW has created is so important for us to understand what is the management doing to really advance gender equity. And so what we see is that, you know, worker voice can really complement and help us really triangulate sort of the holistic understanding around what workers are experiencing around advancing gender equity within the workplace, and also really empowering the factories and the leadership themselves to understand where they should really be focused on to continue to create positive impact within that, beyond sort of the insights that they're getting from, you know, other sources of information.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's interesting because in some ways it should be so obvious that we would engage the workers themselves in designing, you know, the solutions to improve their lives, but it doesn't always happen. So, you know, it's great that you're focused there. Anouk, I want to shift kind of themes a little bit because, you know, coming out of COP26, there are so many conversations about what brands, NGOs, everyone can do to augment climate change mitigation efforts. And I know this is an area where Unilever is already very active, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you see your climate and gender work overlapping, and kind of what are some of the challenges or opportunities to kind of merging those streams of work?
Yeah, thank you, and great question. So I do think that more and more there's a recognition of the interlinkage between the two, right? And the social and the environment agenda, and that, I mean, people are the drivers of change. They are core and key to what we do as a company, right? So you cannot kind of view this in isolation. And I'm very pleased that the issue of climate justice or just transition is kind of much higher on the international agenda. So at Unilever, so basically we set the compass, right? So we have a strategy which is about environment, health and well-being, and driving a fairer and more socially inclusive world, so social. And a cross-cutting issue that we identified is gender. And that means specifically for our climate targets, what we ultimately want to do is put like a gender lens on it. And what I mean by that is in the commitments that we make and in the work that we do, you know, how do we make sure that we include a gender lens on that as well? Because we know that, you know, if some jobs will disappear, women lack access to certain green jobs maybe. Or if you look at the impact on communities, we know that women are more heavily impacted than men as well. So we really kind of need to put a gender lens on kind of all the work that we do, and really think about then the actions and the policies that we actually put in place. So we have, you know, big climate funds or commitments, and then really kind of understand what is the people focus on that, and then specifically the kind of gender lens as well, and in that kind of applying that social lens to climate as well, we want to look at kind of 4 principles, kind of access, equity, participation, and human rights. And in that, obviously, in all of that, gender is such an important thing, because the evidence out there is mind-blowing. If you read about it, I did a session on climate and gender the other day, and it's really heartbreaking if you look at the kind of deep impacts of that climate change has on women.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, looking at these issues as being intersected is the way of the future, right? This is where everyone is going. And so identifying the evidence to support that, as well as the solutions, as you say, is what we all need to be doing.
Plus, I think there's so much kind of, sorry to add, but like there's movement on climate as well. I mean, we need to ride that train as well. I'm not sure if that's the right English expression, but we need to kind of jump on that train and make sure that we leverage that agenda as well, and constantly reiterate the message. Don't forget women, don't forget all the other, don't forget that this is a people agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so just a final kind of question for each of you, in case you have any final thoughts, kind of what are the burning questions that you're hoping to answer in the future with your gender work? And you know, what are your future goals with the work where you're going?
Do you want to go first, Lindsay?
Go for it.
So I guess for us, so under the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, we have a standalone commitment on women. And what we did in our current strategy is to integrate it as a cross-cutting theme. And my hope really is to ensure that this is picked up by everybody in the business, because we're just kind of starting to work with you, and we need to make sure that that is actually happening. That when my colleagues are engaging in new initiatives, that they think about, and that gender is a consideration when they start new work. And then the ideal would be to make sure that our suppliers take it on as well, to really kind of have that impact at scale. Lindsay, over to you.
Thank you. I just love listening. I am so inspired by the work that you are all doing. So it's been such a pleasure to hear more about it today. You know, I think for us, one of the big questions that we've been really thinking about, and it's really come to life, right, over the last 18 months, is how can advancing gender equity support a more resilient workforce and workplace? And so whether we're talking about the impacts we've seen through COVID or climate change, we just recognize that, you know, all of us are going to be facing many headwinds in the future. And so we're really keen to really understand, and I think, Anouk, this is similar to what you're saying, is to really demonstrate, first of all, that advancing gender equity is actually a key lever in developing a more resilient and empowered supply chain. And so I think we're really excited to sort of put proof in the pudding there and understand really like how to bring that to life, and really sort of seeing evidence of that already.
Thanks. Well, thank you both so much for your participation in this engaging discussion, as well as your partnership over the years. We really appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lauren to just close us out.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Anouk, Ali, and the ICRW Advisors team, and to all of you for participating today and being here for this discussion. To just high-level takeaways from the panel, four key things, at least, that I think were really valuable were, one, the multi-step process that this work represents, right? So we've heard from both Unilever and Nike that this is not a quick fix. Leapfrogging is quite hard, and that it is indeed a multi-year journey as you think about an intersectional lens. How do you integrate gender into human rights, into climate change, and your environmental efforts? So thank you for taking us through that multi-step process. Also, it's comprehensive, and there's value in going both broad and deep to triangulate among different parts of the company, but also go really deep down into supply chain and local community. Third, partnership, whether that's external partners that were mentioned, like UN Women on Stereotype Alliance, or also in the community itself. So Lindsay, loved your remarks on putting suppliers in the driver's seat, workers in the driver's seat, and also communities in the driver's seat. And then fourth, these meaty challenges that remain. Climate and gender, a huge challenge of our time. How can we leverage supply chains to help achieve those goals and combine both people and environmental goals in supply chain work? Two, as I couldn't agree with you more, Lindsay, to promote resilience in communities and supply chain among workers and corporate headquarters. So thank you for sharing your vision and your learnings with us. ICRW Advisors is also on a path with a new strategic direction, and we've just welcomed our new CEO, Peggy Clark, who just joined us, and we will be working to scale our efforts at Advisors. So we'll be expanding our approach. We'll be building our team in India and Africa. As I mentioned, we have offices in New Delhi, Nairobi, and Kampala. We're also currently growing our team, so please see our website for current openings. And we will be focusing more in this next year in a couple of areas, which I've listed here: supply chain, which you heard about today, environmental, social, and governance and sustainability work. We'll also be expanding our work with philanthropy and impact investors globally, and we'll be conducting more evaluations for the private sector. So questions of importance, or we can add our research bench to answer questions at factory, at farm, at women-owned businesses, also for products that are going to market. And we'll be doing that in collaboration, in large part through convening around supply chain and leadership, and also, again, partnering with on-the-ground implementers, industry-wide alliances, and coalitions, because we certainly can't do this alone, and it is in partnership with all of you today on this webinar. So thank you so much for joining. For those of you who've left comments and questions, we are gathering them, but if you have, and we will be back in touch. If you don't hear from us, please do email us at info@icrwadvisors.org and follow us there, because we do see so many wonderful comments coming in, and we want to give our full attention today to the panel. So we will respond in due course. So thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And it was an absolute pleasure to share. And thank you again to Anouk and to Lindsay for sharing your insights. Thank you very much.